going to tie up a Ray Bergman wet fly from his book Trout. This is the Lady Gray. Very interesting little wet fly. It's tied a little bit different than some of your more traditional, I guess, wet flies. It has a palmered hackle, or the hackle on this, not like a traditional collar or throat. And it uses some jungle cock body feathers for the wing, similar to another wet fly in Trout called the Emma. One thing I wanted to point out real quick, when I was tying this fly and I was putting some lacquer on the head there, a lot of times you have to, with the lacquer that you use, you got to thin it down every now and again, because it just being open, it gets thicker and thicker. If you thin it down too much, you have to be careful, because as you can see in this one, I thinned it down too much and it kind of soaked its way up into the base of the collar here and the wing and even into the dubbing. So it didn't just stay on the thread here where when I touched all of this and it touched this other material, it soaked its way up in there. Just something to be careful of. As a fishing fly, which this is, I don't think it's going to certainly affect the fishability of the fly. But if you're going to be tying some of these to present to other people, just be a little bit careful with the lacquer that you put on, that can happen. Of course, all the flies that I tie off camera are just perfect and there's never a mistake. So I like to keep in the mistakes that I do on camera, just to let you know that they do happen. So anyway, that is The Lady Gray by Ray Bergman, and I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start the Lady Gray with my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 33.99 in a size 4. I'll go ahead and debarb the hook. For thread, I'm going to use a black thread. This is a Danville 6/0 in black. The body is a dubbed gray rabbit fur body, so I don't have to worry about a floss and darkening it up. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the black and stick with that throughout the fly. Went ahead and waxed my thread, give me a little bit more grip with this. I'll attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to advance this down to just to the point of the hook. Here I'll tie in the tail. The tail for the original Lady Gray, I think, was a Mandarin, but you can use a bronze mallard if you want. I'm actually going to use, this is a regular mallard, gray mallard flank feather that's dyed a wood duck color. I only need about half a dozen, maybe 8 of these barbs here, so I'm just going to separate those. You could have a little bit fuller if you want. Just going to separate those from the rest, peel those off the rachis, and I'll tie these in. I like to roll these in my finger. When you take them off, they tend to all be together. The barbules have them all hooked together and they tend to have a curve to them. I like to moisten my fingers a little bit and just kind of roll these a little bit. That helps to kind of spread them out, so I don't end up with a tail that's just all stuck together. Now, as soon as you fish this, I imagine they're going to all separate, certainly after you hook a fish or two with this, but you can, if you want to separate those a little bit, you can just do that. I'm going to go with a little bit longer tail on that. I tie that in and advance my thread down to the end of the shank there. There is no tag or tip on this fly. And again, because it's a dubbed body, I'm not concerned about having any bumps up under here. The rib on this is a gold rib, and I'm using a Danville size 14 silver and Mylar tinsel. Actually, I think it's silver. It's the silver side that I need to use on this. That's right. So I'll tie that in a second, but first I'm going to tie in the hackle. The hackle on the Lady Gray is a palmered hackle, and I'm going to use a Schlappen for this. One thing you want to be careful of when you're selecting the Schlappen feather. A lot of your Schlappen feathers will have broader, rounder tips like this, or even if they come to a point, sometimes they will have the barbs right away get long and extra long and thick, just a few wraps in here. Because you don't want the barbs on this, I'll usually go at least the gap of the hook, maybe 1.5 times the gap of the hook or so. You don't want them much longer than that. I don't think it's going to hurt if you do have some like that, but you want to take a little care when you're selecting these to maybe find one that has a little bit finer tip to it. Also, partly depends on how flexible or how webby. Depends on how webby you want the hackle barbs to be. The Schlappen tends to be not as stiff as like a rooster saddle hackle or something. If you wanted to, you could use a rooster saddle hackle and you'd have something with a little bit more stiff body to it. Anyhow, I'm tying in the hackle first, and the reason is because it's going to be the last thing that's applied. So I'm going to isolate the tip here and tie in a couple of wraps and get that hackle tied in. Make certain I trim this back so it doesn't go past the body. Now I'll put my rib in. I want to tie this in the gold side up so that it will turn over to the silver side. Tie that in with a couple of nice tight wraps. Now I'm ready for the body. The body just calls for a gray hare's ear. You could just get some pre-made gray hare's ear dubbing. That's what this is. I'm actually using what's called a hare's ear plus. It's by Hairline. Has just a little bit of flash to it. I was curious to see if that might work as a little bit more of an attractor on this pattern. But the traditional is just a gray hare's ear. I'm not going to make this dubbing noodle that thick, and I'm not going to taper the body. I'm just going to make it nice and even. So I'm going to dub this on probably about a 5 or 6 inch dubbing noodle here. Maybe a little bit longer. You could always add a little bit more if you want. But my goal is to just get a nice, even, smooth body here. I'm going to keep the diameter of all that the same. I could use just a hair more of the hare's ear. No pun intended there. So the rib's going to go on first, and the hackle will actually follow the rib. That's part of the reason why the hackle was tied in first. I'm going to take my hackle pliers to help me grab onto this, extend my reach a little bit. I just want 5 evenly spaced wraps of this rib. I think because of that very first one I had in there, I ended up with 6, but it all came apart, so I can redo this. We'll take that as a 1, 2, and then this one will come right up here. So that gives me 5 evenly spaced wraps. As I mentioned, a hackle is palmered, and it is wrapped in so it just follows the back edge of the tinsel. Some of these flies that do this, they'll have the rachis of that hackle follow either the front edge or the back edge. I tend to favor in any of these the back edge because it's a little easier for me to just bring it up onto the tinsel and then let it kind of slide to the back side of that tinsel. The other thing is, if you want your hackle to be a little sparser on this fly, and any of these types of flies that have a palmered hackle on them, what you can do is you can strip off half of the barbs. I'll get one complete wrap right up here at the head and then tie that off. But you can strip off 1/2 of the barbs from the feather prior to tying that in so that when you're palmering this forward, you end up with half the fullness with all those barbs. It's up to you. Some people prefer that. I think this looks just fine with all those on there. Again, if you're keeping it to just 5 wraps following that rib, then it tends to not get too bulky anyway. So I'm going to sweep these back and down a little bit. I'm just moistening my fingers a little and sweeping these back and down and out of the way. And I only want them down simply because it's going to make it easier to tie in the wing. And I'm going to bring this back to about a full eye length behind the eye of the hook. That's where I'm going to tie the wing in. So by sweeping these down and back, I'll get that wing tied in here, and I don't have to deal with a lot of these hackle barbs in the way. Understand that when you fish this, all of that will then kind of bounce back and flow around it. The wing on the Lady Gray is made from some jungle cock body feathers. Now I've selected 2 of them here that have fairly round tips to them. When you look at the feathers on the jungle cock, you'll see there's a number of them, the body feathers that are here, and then the longer ones. A number of them they have a fine point to them, and it's really up to you whether you want some that have just a little bit of a round tip, or even a little bit fatter round tip to them, something like this right here. That's kind of up to you. It's just your taste. But I like to go with something that has just a little bit more roundness to it. It's not quite so pointed. I'm going to get these together, concave sides together so that they flatten out. I'm going to match those tips up like this. Flattens the whole thing out. Now I know a lot of this fluff here I'm not going to use. So I'm just going to peel that off to get it out of my way. Then I can, holding these together, measure that wing. When I tie that in, I want the wing to be about halfway down the tail. So that's too long right there. I'll hold this again, keeping the tips together, and peel more of those barbs off. So I have a little bit shorter wing here. And that's almost there. I want just a little bit more. You can also peel a little bit more off the bottom if you want to help you lay the wing down a little bit. You know, you can also tie these in on the sides so that it's a little bit more horizontal if you want, but I find with all those hackles, it's in the way. This is going to kind of cock up simply because of the way it's tied in. So that's, at least in my opinion, that's kind of inevitable. I'll hold this right on top here, a little pinch wrap. I'm going to get a half a dozen wraps in there to hold that in and take a look at it. And that gives me pretty much the position that I want. I will flip the excess off, then holding this all together so I don't wrap in anything, I'll shape the head on the Lady Gray. You just need to make this so you have a nice transition. Doesn't have to be large and bulky. Flatten my thread, and I'll put in a 8 or 9 turn whip finish. Trim away my excess thread. Now you can kind of stroke some of those hackle fibers up a little bit where they're going to end up anyway. And that'll give you a better idea of what the fly is going to look like. I'll put some head cement right here just to protect that. This is a fly tight head cement. It's an alcohol-based head cement, and it will soak down into the head there and make it nice and solid so that it doesn't come unraveled and it can take some abuse. At the same time, I'll come back in a little bit and I'll put some black lacquer on that to turn around and protect that a little bit more. So that's the Lady Gray, another Ray Bergman wet fly. A fun and interesting little fly, a little different from some of the more traditional wet flies that are in his book. A little different wing, kind of like an Abby in a way. No, not the Abby, I'm thinking of the Emma. So that is the Lady Gray. Thanks for watching today. Thank you for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned a new pattern, at least a tip or trick here and there. If you'd like to help Dress Irons, you can like, comment, share, subscribe, all those wonderful things for the video. You can also head out to dressedirons.com where you can buy flies, tools, stickers, and merch, or you can join a growing community over on Locals at the Dressed Irons Fly Tying Guild. You can also donate to Dressed Irons if you want through the link at the bottom of the description. I thank everybody for their ongoing support, as it really does help the creation of these videos. But what's important is to remember, only fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.